I know it's there. I've got to believe it because I see the reactions, I see the photographs, I see the critics and people who recognize it in the street.
Before Audrey Hepburn died, there was one name that kept coming back to her story. Not one of her famous husbands, not William Holden, not another Hollywood star. It was a man from the earliest and most painful chapter of her life. For decades, Audrey carried the memory of someone who had left when she was only 6 years old. She eventually found him again, but the reunion was nothing like the one she had imagined. And the strangest part? She still chose to forgive him. Audrey Hepburn seemed to have everything. She had the beauty Hollywood adored, the elegance that made her famous around the world. Starring roles in movies like Roman Holiday, Sabrina, Breakfast at Tiffany's, and My Fair Lady. To millions, she looked almost like a woman who had stepped out of a fairy tale. But behind that image was a much harder story. Her father, Joseph Rustin, left when she was only 6. That loss stayed with her for decades. Audrey was born in Brussels in 1929. Her childhood was not simple or stable. Her family moved between different places, and she grew up surrounded by several languages and cultures. But then everything changed. For a child, that disappearance created questions that never seemed to have answers. Why did he leave? Did he miss her? Would he ever come back? Was there something she could have done differently? Audrey did not have the answers, and that unanswered pain became part of her life. When she was sent to boarding school in England, she saw other children leave during holidays to spend time with their families. Audrey waited too, but her father did not come. That silence was painful. And then history made her childhood even harder. When World War II began, Audrey was living in the Netherlands. In 1940, German forces invaded. She was still just a child. Suddenly, the world around her was filled with fear, hunger, and danger. She and her family struggled through the occupation. Food became harder to find. At one point, they survived on whatever they could find, including tulip bulbs. The future Hollywood star was not living like a celebrity. She was simply trying to survive. And yet, even during those terrible years, something inside Audrey refused to disappear. She loved ballet. Dance gave her something to hold on to when almost everything else seemed uncertain. According to accounts of her life, Audrey performed secret dance shows to help raise money for the Dutch resistance. There were no movie premieres, no designer dresses, no photographers waiting outside. There was only a frightened young girl trying to survive a war. By the time the Netherlands was liberated, Audrey had experienced things that most people could never imagine. She had known hunger, she had known fear, and she had known what it felt like to lose people. But there was one loss that remained different from all the others. Her father. Years later, Audrey became one of the most admired women in the world. But fame could not erase childhood memories. Success could not rewrite the past, and becoming one of Hollywood's biggest stars could not answer the question that had followed her for years. Why had her father left? As Audrey grew older, she entered relationships with men who were often older and confident. Her first major marriage was to Mel Ferrer. At first, the relationship looked beautiful from the outside. They were both involved in the arts, they understood the world of acting, they appeared to be a powerful Hollywood couple. But over time, the relationship became much more difficult. Ferrer was increasingly controlling, with strong opinions about Audrey's career, public image, and personal life. Audrey was famous to the world, yet inside her marriage, she often felt like she had to follow someone else's direction. Motherhood was extremely important to Audrey. She wanted children deeply. She experienced miscarriages before eventually becoming a mother to her son, Sean. When Sean was born in 1960, Audrey stepped away from acting for a period of time. For a woman at the height of Hollywood fame, that was a huge decision. But she wanted something more important than another movie. She wanted to be there for her child. Perhaps, in a way, she wanted to give her son something she had not received herself. A parent who was present. A parent who stayed. But her marriage continued to fall apart. After 14 years, Audrey and Ferrer divorced. She was free from the relationship, but the emotional scars did not simply disappear. Then came another relationship and another disappointment. Audrey later married Andrea Dotti, an Italian psychiatrist. At first, this new life looked like the peaceful future she had been searching for. She moved to Rome. She focused on family. She tried to step away from the Hollywood machine. But the marriage eventually became troubled as well. Reports of Dotti's affairs created more pain and unwanted public attention. Eventually, that marriage ended too. 2 marriages, 2 painful endings. And one question still remained underneath everything. Why did Audrey keep searching for a kind of love that seemed so difficult to hold on to? The answer may have started much earlier than Hollywood, much earlier than her husband's, much earlier than her fame. It may have started with the little girl who watched other children go home for the holidays while she waited for a father who never came. After 2 difficult marriages, Audrey could have decided that love was simply not worth the risk. Instead, she did something unexpected. She stopped chasing the life everyone else expected her to live. By the late 1970s, Audrey was no longer trying to prove herself in Hollywood. She had already done that. She had become one of the most recognizable actresses in the world. But the older Audrey became, the less interested she was in being famous. She wanted quiet. She wanted simple mornings. She wanted time with her family. And she wanted a home where she could finally breathe. That home was La Paisible, her farmhouse in Tolochenaz, Switzerland. The name itself meant the peaceful one. She spent time in her garden. She walked her dogs. She enjoyed ordinary routines. She lived far away from the constant noise of Hollywood. For someone who had spent years being photographed and watched, this simple life was precious. Then Robert Wolders entered her world. Their meeting was not the kind of dramatic Hollywood moment people might expect. There was no movie set, no huge premiere, no crowd of reporters. They met at a charity auction in the late 1970s. Wolders was a Dutch actor and businessman who had also experienced loss in his own life. At first, Audrey did not seem interested in starting another serious relationship. But the next day, something changed. Audrey contacted him and suggested they meet for a drink. That drink became a long conversation. Then came more conversations. Soon, they were speaking every day, and slowly, something different began to grow. This relationship did not look like Audrey's earlier romances. There was no need to impress anyone. No need to create a perfect Hollywood image. No need to prove that they were the perfect couple. They simply enjoyed being together. Wolders gave Audrey something she had wanted for years: steadiness, respect, peace. They never officially married, but Audrey introduced him as her husband. To her, the commitment was already real. They built a life together at La Paisible, and for more than a decade, they shared the quiet routines that Audrey had wanted for so long. It was a very different ending to the romantic story people expected from a Hollywood star. Audrey had once been surrounded by glamorous people. Now, she was happiest in a garden. She had once been chased by photographers. Now, she enjoyed being an ordinary neighbor. She had once lived under the pressure of Hollywood. Now, she had a home where she could simply be Audrey. But there was another change coming. One that would completely transform the final years of her life. Audrey's childhood experiences during World War II had never left her. She remembered hunger. She remembered fear. She remembered what it felt like to be a child in a world where adults could not always protect you. She also remembered something else. After the war, a UNICEF worker gave her a chocolate bar. It was a small gift, but Audrey never forgot it. In 1988, Audrey became a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador. Suddenly, the woman who had spent years playing characters on screen was traveling around the world to help real children. She visited countries where children were facing hunger, poverty, disease, and war. Ethiopia, Sudan, Bangladesh, El Salvador, and other places where suffering was not something people watched in a movie. It was real. Audrey did not treat the work like a publicity opportunity. She took it personally, because she knew what it felt like to be hungry. She knew what it felt like to be afraid, and she knew what it meant to be a child who needed help. Wolders often traveled with her. He did not try to become the center of attention. He stayed beside her. That mattered. Then, in 1992, Audrey's life changed again. After returning from a humanitarian trip to Somalia, she began experiencing severe pain in her stomach. Doctors eventually discovered that she had a rare and aggressive cancer. The diagnosis was devastating. The disease had already spread. There was little that could be done. Audrey knew she was facing the end of her life. But people around her later described something remarkable. She remained calm. She was not focused on fame. She was not focused on money. She was not focused on how the world would remember her. Her greatest concern was the work she would have to leave unfinished. The young woman who once wanted to become a ballet dancer had survived war. The actress who became a Hollywood legend had walked away from fame. The mother who wanted to give her children a better childhood had built a family. And the woman who had spent years searching for love had finally found peace. But there was one thing she wanted before she died. She wanted to go home. Audrey was too sick to travel commercially, so Hubert de Givenchy, her longtime friend and designer, helped arrange a private flight so she could return to Switzerland. She made it home to La Paisible. Her final Christmas was spent there, surrounded by people she loved. And even near the end, Audrey thought about others. She gave winter coats to 3 men who were especially important to her: Robert Wolders, her son Sean, and Givenchy. It was a small gesture, but it fit the woman Audrey had become. She had spent her life learning how painful it was when someone did not show up, so she made sure she showed up for others. On January 20th, 1993, Audrey Hepburn died peacefully at her home in Switzerland. She was 63. The world lost a movie star. But those who knew her understood that her real legacy was much bigger than her films. It was her kindness, her forgiveness, her work for children, and the way she continued giving love even after experiencing so much loss. But there was still one final chapter to her story. Years before her death, after decades of wondering, Audrey decided she needed to find her father. Using the Red Cross, she was able to track down Joseph Rustin. He had been living in Dublin. After decades apart, Audrey finally had a chance to meet the man she had spent much of her life thinking about. Imagine that moment. A woman who had become an international star. A woman admired by millions, standing in front of the man whose absence had shaped her childhood. She had spent years imagining what this reunion might feel like. Maybe she expected an apology. Maybe she hoped he would finally explain why he left. Maybe she simply wanted him to tell her that he had missed her. But reality was different. The reunion did not give Audrey the emotional closure she had hoped for. Her father remained distant. There was no perfect explanation, no dramatic apology, no magical moment that erased decades of pain. Audrey had finally found the man she had been searching for. But finding him did not mean finding the answers. And yet, something Audrey did next would surprise many people. She forgave him, not because the past suddenly became acceptable, not because the pain had never happened, but because Audrey seemed unwilling to let anger control the rest of her life. She even supported her father financially. Think about that. The man who had left when she was 6, the man she had waited for, the man who could not give her the answers she wanted. She still chose to help him. That decision reveals something powerful about Audrey Hepburn. She spent much of her life searching for love, but perhaps, as she grew older, she began to understand that love was not always about receiving what you wanted. Sometimes it was about deciding what kind of person you wanted to become after being hurt. And Audrey had made that decision long before anyone knew the full story. So the answer to the question at the beginning is this: Audrey Hepburn never truly got over her father, Joseph Rustin. Not because he had been the greatest love of her life. He wasn't. Not because their relationship had been happy. It wasn't. But because his absence created a question Audrey carried for most of her life. What would her childhood have been like if he had stayed? What would she have become if she had never experienced that abandonment? But Audrey did something remarkable with that pain. She did not allow it to destroy her. She turned it into compassion. She became the mother she wished she had always needed. She became an advocate for children who had no voice. She gave love even when she knew what it felt like to lose it. She chose to stay. She chose to forgive. And she chose to give others the love she had spent so much of her own life searching for. That is why the story of the man she never got over is not really a story about romance. It is a story about a little girl, a missing father, and a woman who spent the rest of her life learning how to turn pain into love.